Welcome to Make It Plain from Make Plain Jesus Ministries, featuring Pastor James Bryan, where we take biblical truths in everyday situations and break them down to be as plain as possible. So, stay tuned and enjoy the broadcast.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Make It Plain. And so today I have this privilege again to explore a different topic with you, and hopefully this is going to resonate with some of you, and for some it might, kind of shake some things inside. For others it may be a confirmation moment where you're like, yeah, I agree with that. That's right. And so we want to just share something simple from a biblical perspective, but really just regular truths in life. And so today I want to talk with you about this topic called sometimes it takes work. Believe it or not, sometimes it really takes work. And so the essence of this is this whole concept about, what do we have to work for? What should be given to us? What should just fall into our laps? All of those things. And so depending on who you are, depending on your background, depending on the types of things you watch on a regular basis, forms your opinion and gives you an answer to that question or that thought process. You see, a lot of folks nowadays feel like things should be given to them. And I'm not saying anything either way about whether it should or not, or about any particular issue. But there is this understanding, or I wouldn't even say understanding, there is this thought process where folks feel like, well, I should have it, and it should be given to me. And so the question becomes, is that valid? And then I'm even going to ask you this question, and I know I may step on a few toes with this one, but asking the question of, well, I got faith, so it should just fall into my lap. Is that true? Or on the opposite side of that, where people just say, you just got to work for what you have, and yeah, you got faith involved, but really you're just working for it. And so it's all of those mindsets that I kind of want to just touch on just for a few minutes. You see, I really believe that many of you would fall into each of those categories. So no matter who's listening to this, you'll find a category that fits well with you. And so I want to begin to expand upon that a little bit more, maybe to unpack it a little bit more so we can look into it to say, well, what is the right view of that? You see, I often talk about, and many countless other folks talk about, it's good to have dreams. Dreams for your life, dreams for your family, dreams for your relationships, dreams for your finances. Like, what if I had this, what would I do? You can dream about your vacation. In other words, it's good to dream or to kind of think about and noodle in your mind a bit about things that may come and how you would relate to them and how you would deal with them, right? So those things are good. If you never do that, then you're missing out on a lot. You're not projecting the way that you should. So dreaming is healthy. But on some occasions, there are people that take the thought that I can dream of this, so it's always possible. Yep, that's true. But beyond that, that's all that's ever done. There's a dream of, man, it'd be great to see me at, somebody would say, having millions of dollars. That's common what folks would say. Okay, you have millions of dollars. How will you get there? What steps will you take? And a lot of times we don't go in that direction. We just look at a dream and say it's great, and we leave it there. And so when we think about it, we got to realize that dreams are good, but they don't always come true. Let me say that again. Dreams are good, but they don't always come true, because it's really the source of your dream. I mean, what are you dreaming it from? Just because you saw someone on TV with a certain thing, and now all of a sudden you're dreaming that you have the exact same thing, the exact color car, the exact color hair, the exact vehicle, the exact everything. Well, that's more of just wanting to be that person. And that's a little bit different. But sometimes we have dreams that we dream just because we feel like we're forced into that area. That's the expectation someone has of us. But it's not something necessarily that we truly want, but it's like, okay, well, I dream that, I own the next tech company that's worth $1 billion. But you may hate technology. And so that's not a valid dream. So when we think about it from this standpoint, we got to realize that a dream is great because it gives you a point of focus or a point in which you want to go and achieve something. It gives you a direction is probably the best way to say it. And so once you have a direction, that means now you know where you're going. Case in point, I live in the mid-Atlantic area of the United States. If I wanted to go to Florida, my vision or my direction is south because that's where the warm weather is and that's where the state of Florida is. So I have a direction, but if I'm looking that way but never do anything about it, I'm still just dreaming and looking. But once I start the car and begin driving, now I'm starting the journey. So the dream I haven't realized, but I'm on my way. But prior to starting the car, it was just a dream, just a figment of my imagination that I never attempted to bring to pass until I started the engine. So when we think about dreams, we have to realize that sometimes it takes work. My work would be driving 13 to 15 hours or more, depending on what part of Florida I was going to. And that's the work of driving that far. We have to realize that when we have dreams, we have to work it. Every once in a while, a dream that you may have will kind of fall into your lap. And what I mean by that is just all of a sudden, all the right doors open, everything is in place, any bit of finances or whatever you need for that dream, it just appears. And that happens from time to time. But that's not the way it works most of the time. Most of the time, it requires work. And so that requires doing some things. And I'm saying this particular podcast because I know many folks that are dear to me that have great dreams. And I always tell them that, you have to really look at your dream and then, yes, go after it. But unfortunately, a number of them will dream it, but they never take the next step of doing what's necessary to go toward that dream. And so time goes by and they're still dreaming, but there's never any action to substantiate or bring it to pass. And so when we think about this, it sometimes takes work for you to be able to have your dream come to pass. And remember, your dream is a destination, but you have to go and get there. So I have a person that I've known, and this person he has gotten into, a kind of semi-retirement. And what he said to me one time was, hey, James, you know what? I worked extremely hard most of my life. I mean, I worked a lot of hours, started my business, worked a lot of hours, gone through many things. And now at this point, I finally got to the point that I can relax and enjoy. In other words, he's retiring pretty well off now. He put in extremely long hours for years and years. He had a dream of something that he wanted to do, a business that he wanted to start. And he did, and he was able to expand it to multiple locations. And he started out, not that he had a Harvard degree or anything like that, because he really didn't at all. He just had an idea and understanding of the basics of a certain type of business. And he went ahead and started it. And he worked it. He put in all the sweat hours, sweat equity. He put in all the effort there. And now he's got a couple of houses. One's up in this general area, and one's down where it's warmer. And he can go back and forth. He's able to live the life that he wants. He's got enough to retire on comfortably. And so for him, he realized he had a dream. And then he spent the time working that dream and kept on working it through everything that was going on, all the ups and downs. That's something that we always have to remember. But for some folks, it may come easier. Maybe they have an in or someone who sets them up. Great. Don't hate them for it. But know what your dream is, and you work your dream, because then it's the dream that's coming to pass for you, and you appreciate it so much more. I know of another gentleman who had gotten to the point of getting toward his PhD, and he had mentioned to me, he says, look, I'm not the smartest. I wasn't the smartest person. In fact, I really wasn't. And so for me, I knew I wanted to get to a certain level. So I had to study twice as hard and longer than everybody else because the concepts didn't come to me easily. And I had to keep grinding until I was able to absorb it. And then finally, he was able to reach his dream. There are some even he used to talk about that could catch on quickly. He said that wasn't him. But yet he had a dream and he kept pushing and kept pushing until he was able to achieve what he wanted to achieve. And so we have to remember that sometimes it really does take work. And then we keep our focus on that dream, as I often talk about, that focus on the dream until we're able to realize it and see it. I see this challenge that people have between their dream and the reality many times in business and in churches. In churches, what I see, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is this concept between faith and works. You see, some people want to earn their way into good graces with God. Some people want to earn their way into, good graces with people. But what happens is, and I'm giving you a little bit of a spiritual or Christian perspective briefly right here. And that is this. It's important to understand what you need to do and have faith in the one who provides, which is the Lord himself. And you make sure you have that faith, ground that faith, make sure it's something that's biblical. But then you need to work it. But what you're doing when you're working it based on the faith that you have in Jesus helping you work it out. So you may have faith that, I'm making this up, but maybe one day that you want to be a pastor of a church. That's a lot of work, so think about that. But if you want to be a pastor of a church, well, it's great to have a vision. So what you need to do now is begin to study more. Get all the studying, interact with folks, understand how to apply what you're studying, and begin to build that up and get to the point when you can begin to minister, practice that. That's work. See, all of this is work going toward the goal. Your faith says that's what God wants for you. So you're activating your faith by the way that you live and the way that you walk. And that means that as you're getting prepared for that vision of becoming a pastor, what you're doing is that you're cleaning up your life, things that you know that aren't appropriate, things that you shouldn't be doing. And so it's all of those. It takes work. That's how things come about. Let me give you a couple of examples also from this whole concept of vision to the work that it takes to achieve it, because it does take work. And these examples aren't necessarily Christian folks. I don't know for sure if they are. That's not the important part. But this whole concept in life, this is a life nugget. It also works from a Christian perspective. But I want you to understand a few things. Most of the people that you see that succeeded most have had to work for it. So don't go around saying, I want this, I should have that. You got to put the work in. Secondly, they may not talk about all the details involved, but all of them had to go through a lot of sweat equity, meaning times when they weren't sure how things were going to work. They had to make sacrifices at certain places, or maybe life kind of threw them a curve and they had to respond to that curve. And so they had to put the work in. So there's one in particular, I'm going to start off, Madam C.J. Walker. And she's one, you can look her up, but she had a quote during this time because she owned her own business, but she had to start out in a different way because she was the daughter of a slave. And so after several failed marriages and other things that totally went wrong in her life, she had this one quote. She says, I had to make my own living and my own opportunity, but I made it. Don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. Get up and make them. So she had to come to the realization the only way that she would survive, based on the circumstances where she lived during that time, and based on all the other personal things that fell apart in her life, was she had to focus, and she had to then put in the work to build and to create something out of nothing. And so she did. I mean, she survived the poverty during that time. She just survived the death of her parents, failed marriages. She did all of those things until she got a business that was her dream, that she realized was aligned with who she is or who she was, with a hair care line and some other things. So she realized that, yeah, things weren't great, and maybe people around her that she knew weren't doing well, but that was not an excuse for her to not pursue her dream. And so that's the key point right there. We forget at times, and we think that, well, it's not ideal or no one else is doing it, so you give up. But really, those who persevere no matter what's going on are the ones that later on people say, well, how did you do that? And, they'll tell you they had to work hard and it wasn't easy. So that was one person. Think about someone that you may know from a popular perspective, Damon John. You've seen him on Shark Tank and everything else. And so one of the interesting things with him is he started his business selling shirts and hats and things like that out of the trunk of his car while he still kept his full-time job. You know what his full-time job was? Guess. He worked at Red Lobster full-time. So he had to make sure he had some money coming in while he started what he really wanted to do. And he kept putting in the sweat equity of hours. Remember, he had a full-time job. And then he had this that he was doing. He and his mom had to sew their own products, which is the hats and the shirts and everything else. And they had to do all that sweat equity. And they had to go and sell them and tell people about it. And so they had to be bold about those things. And so what he has now, his empire that he has, if you will, or his businesses are things that he dreamt about, that he wanted to get. And he wanted to change the environment from where he was to a point where he was able to make a difference, not just locally in his community, but for his family and all. So it's something to realize and think about. I'm going to give you one more, just to kind of encourage you that sometimes it does take work, but don't be afraid of the word work. There is Cher Wang. She formed HTC. They made cell phones and all. But from her perspective, she looked at things. She came from a family of moguls who built things and created things. And so she came to the point of saying, well, what am I going to do? And so she started a company that did networks and things like that, network equipment and all. But she switched over when she saw the market change to doing cell phones and things like that. And so she saw that vision. She put in the hours, the work and everything else. And then she pushed through all of that and became successful. When she looks at about her time, the point I made about putting in sweat equity, she says this. She says, Jesus tells you have to work hard. So she says, Jesus tells you have to work hard. Then she says, I don't understand the idea of leisure time. Now, I'm not telling you to never take time off. I'm not going to that extreme. I don't want you to write into the podcast and say, you're telling people to work and work and work. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes you have to put in hours and weeks in order for your dream to come to pass. And so I just want to get this part over to you as we're starting in 2021. Regardless of the situation, you still can succeed. You still can see your dreams come to pass. You still can just reap the benefits of everything that you thought about. But you got to remember, it still takes work to do it. Sometimes it's personal sacrifices. Maybe you can't hang out as much as you would like to with certain friends or other folks. Maybe you can't go on for a period of time certain trips that you wanted to do, but because you wanted to reinvest that particular money into your dream. Maybe it turns out that you can still do your trips, but maybe you cut back on some of the luxury grocery things. Whatever that may be to reach your dream, you just got to look at it and say, how do I get there? Lord, help me to get there. Show me the way. And then once you have that plan there and you got faith in that plan, start working it. And the key word is working it. You can't just say one day it's going to drop in my lap. because it does at times, but most of the time, you've got to at least put in some sweat equity. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. Hopefully it gives you some things to think about. But again, I want you to understand that everything is possible, even during times when it seems like it's not. Just work on that plan, work on that vision, that dream, and then work it from there. If this has been a blessing or something helpful for you, send us a note and let us know. Send us a note to our contact us at makeplainjesus.org, and we will just respond to you. We're always happy to hear from folks who are listening. And for those of you who are listening and this has been a benefit, tell some others about it. Share it with them so that we can also be a blessing to them. Until then, we want to make sure you have a great day. We'll talk to you later.